Good evening. This is Alex Quiros with Buddhism 101. It is, I believe, May 12th, 7 p.m. So today we are going to have our usual service. We're going to have our meditation, then Dharma talk, and then meditation. For the Dharma talk today, we're going to briefly look at the Buddhist take on trauma. So for today, as in previous weeks, what we'll be doing is we'll have a 10-minute meditation. During the 10-minute meditation, you want to take some time to just focus on the breath. You want to take time to calm your mind. You want to take time to be present in the here and now. There are 3 things we suggest to help you with your meditation. One is to simply focus on the sensation of breathing, how it feels to breathe. I've mentioned this a couple of times, especially now during the time of the coronavirus outbreak. I find that breathing takes a whole new meaning. And so breathing allows me to, in the breathing, what I'm finding is that when I meditate, I'm grateful for my breath. I'm mindful that there are others taking their last breath. And I am mindful that there are others who cannot breathe on their own and now rely on a machine. So in my meditation now, as I breathe, as I take in a deep breath, I am grateful. And I enjoy that breath. So focus on the sensation of the breath. Focus on how good it feels to be able to breathe. The second focus, or second potential exercise, is to count your breaths. Count your breaths up to the number 10 and then start over again at 1. The third method is to use a mantra or a gatha, a phrase or a word, and you repeat it over and over again. The phrase that we often recommend is one where breathing in, so as you inhale, you say in your mind, breathing in, I calm my mind. Breathing out, I smile. And you have a half smile on your face. Inevitably, no matter how good of a meditator you become, you're going to have moments where you will be distracted. And so when that happens, gently, non-judgmentally, and compassionately, return your focus back on your breath. It's that focus, that refocusing, that becomes the exercise of mindfulness. You are practicing being mindful, and catching yourself being distracted is a really good mindfulness practice. And then you refocus back on the breath. After our breathing exercise, we're going to talk a bit about on the Buddhist take on trauma. The reason that I got inspired to talk a bit about that was that we are hearing that one of the mental health consequences of the viral outbreak is that we're going to have more anxiety, more depression, and more trauma, more PTSD. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what one Buddhist take on trauma. If you are someone who has experienced trauma in the past and it still bothers you, I highly recommend that you take the time to seek help and try to incorporate your Buddhist understanding into your reframing of what happened. After the Dharma talk, then we'll do another 10-minute meditation so we can simply sit with the emotions, sit with the thoughts that may have grabbed our attention, and maybe gather some insight into what we are learning here today. So go ahead and place yourself in a comfortable position, in a position that's comfortable enough that you can stay still for 10 minutes, not so comfortable that you fall asleep. Take the time to take a few deep breaths and be really appreciative of the fact that you can still breathe. You can still take those deep breaths. And focus on how refreshing those breaths are. How good it feels to fill your lungs with air. So I mentioned earlier I would talk a little bit about the Buddhist perspective on trauma. And there are two main ideas from Buddhism that I'll rely on as I talk about trauma. One is that one of the things Buddhism challenges us to do is to see reality for what it is and to be aware of the ways that we distort reality or fog it up or kind of miss the mark on what reality is or just slightly distort it. Buddhism asks us to just be mindful of how our mind and our past influences what we see and experience, and how that can sometimes pull us away from the here and now reality. The other thing that Buddhism challenges us to incorporate into our lives is this idea that we are in charge of our suffering. No one else. Others can cause us pain, but the suffering we bring on ourselves. I'll give you an example. Many of us probably know of that elderly man or woman who, experiencing the pains that come with old age, does a lot of complaining and a lot of talking about what's wrong with them, their ailments, their illnesses, their sickness. And they can be a bit of a downer, and they suffer a lot. But I've also met other elderly men and women who, suffering from very similar pains, are happy, dance, smile, crack jokes, and in some ways seem to be more accepting about their situation in life. And so the difference there is that one has realized that they have control over how much they suffer. I often say pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So how does this relate to trauma? There are varying degrees of trauma. And if you have the misfortune of having experienced a very severe trauma, I hope that you will or have seeked out help, as I am pretty sure a short 15-minute Dharma talk is not going to cure anything. But I hope that this can put things in a different perspective. And if you have friends or family who have experienced trauma, this may be a way for you to help you understand what they're going through from a Buddhist perspective. You see, when an individual experiences a traumatic event, there is a clash between beliefs and thoughts in their mind. Very often you will hear when they talk about the trauma, an undertone of "it shouldn't have happened," or "why did it happen that way? Why did it happen to me? This shouldn't have happened. It's not fair. It's not just." And these ideas, these shoulds, these oughts, clash with the reality that it did happen. And so this clashing between these ideas exacerbates any of the negative feelings that come from the clashing of these ideas and from the traumatic experience. From the Buddhist perspective, then, it's important to try and find that balance, the reality. The reality is it shouldn't have happened. The reality is that it happened to you. The reality is that it was not fair. And you can hold the idea of it shouldn't have happened with it happened. So a lot of times there's this belief that you can't have both ideas. But when you learn to balance both ideas, the should-haves with the what did happen, you're able to work with the trauma better. Let me see if I can give you an example. I worked in the VA hospital, working with vets. And one of the unique things about their perspective, and from many who have experienced trauma, is that they have seen a wider range of human capacity for evil and for good. These veterans have seen men and women be brave and loyal in ways that they've never seen anywhere else except on the battlefield. But also on the battlefield, they saw some of the ugliest of behaviors of humanity. And so while they may have this really wide perspective of human capacity, human behavior, many people in society may only see this much of human capacity for evil and good, for healthy and unhealthy behaviors. So when I work with the vets, I had to often remind them that our capacity for evil is equaled by our capacity to do good. And it kind of put things in perspective. That the things they saw happened and shouldn't have happened, but they did. But they're now balanced out also with the fact that they also witnessed some of the most beautiful things of humanity. And when I talk about balancing both the should-haves with the reality, I'm not saying you should ever give up these should-have. It shouldn't have happened, or if it's unfair. It's these ideas that help us develop that sense of what we should be striving for. We should be striving for a world where these things don't happen, whether it be abuse or murder or hurt from families or hurt from a church. So these are things that shouldn't have happened, and these is what we would like to achieve. But at the same time, equally important is the belief that it happened or it is happening, and holding both. But then adding a third element, and I wish I had a third hand to come out this end, but then balancing all that out with the capacity to do good. You see, one of the things that these shoulds and should nots teach us is what are our own values? What do we value? And the reality tells us that not everyone holds those values. And it challenges us, and here's the other part, the third element. How are you going to choose to live those values? And this is where that Buddhist element of control over your suffering comes in. You know what it should be like. You know what actually happened to you. And now you decide what you're going to do with that, how you're going to live your life, and how you are going to be the model of those values for others. And often that needs to be done with help from a counselor, a psychologist, a priest, a monk, someone who can help you retell your story, reshape your narrative. And you don't have to have gone through any trauma to learn from that balancing act. Because those things apply for many things in our lives that cause us suffering. We have an idea of what a should, an expectation. We have then the clash with reality of what actually happened or what actually happens. And then we have a choice. How do you choose to live out the values that are part of your shoulds, part of your expectations? Ultimately, I think the goal is to have this balanced perspective where you balance the ugliness of the world around us with the hope and the potential around us. That you can balance the reality of your own ugliness with the reality of your own beauty. That you can see your own shadow side and also the angelic, beautiful side, and be able to balance those. It's the middle way. And you'll hear that phrase often in Buddhism, the middle way, that balance. What I ask you to do then is just sit with what I've said today. Take 10 minutes now. We'll go through one more bit of meditation. Maybe think about how those three aspects I mentioned apply to something you're embarrassed about, or something that you're still angry about or sad about, something that still activates you emotionally. What are the shoulds that you are saying to yourself? What are the wishful thinking that's going on in your mind? What is the reality? What are the values then that you are going to choose to live? To reshape your narrative, to reshape your story, to create yourself anew. That's what's beautiful about being in the here and now. You're not enslaved to the past. You can create your story now. I have found that the more and more I sit with that idea that I create my story now, the happier and the more in control I feel. I don't feel I'm done. I don't feel I've reached the ultimate goal. It's a work in progress for many of us, for all of us. But it's a worthwhile job. It's a worthwhile task. Thank you for joining me tonight. I encourage you to do what Leon has done, which is leave comments and continue the discussion on the comment section of the video. I will post these videos right after the session is done. And I encourage you to invite others to come join you as well. It would be great if you had friends and family join you, and then afterwards y'all had your own video conferencing session to discuss what you have, what you thought, what ideas and emotions stirred for you, and be there for each other at a spiritual level. It might be a fun and interesting experience to go through that. Having had some deep spiritual conversation with family members who are of other religions, it can be a very unifying experience. It can also be a difficult experience too, but it's worth a try. I wish you the best of luck. I wish you a good week. We will meet again in 2 weeks. And so we won't meet next week. In 2 weeks, we'll have another meeting. I will post on the Meetup and on Facebook reminders for the meeting in 2 weeks. So the next one will be May 26th. Take care, everyone. Be safe. Stay healthy.